So here are the notes for Lesson 4, fault types. And before we get into the actual faults, we are going to talk about the different types of forces that make these faults happen. So these forces happen inside the Earth. And the first type of force we have to talk about here is called compression. So if you're compressing things, you can see this is the way you're going. You're pressing on both sides to squeeze them. So compression is to push together, and draw a couple arrows like that. Up next we have the opposite of compression. You can see we got, if we're pulling apart, that's obviously the opposite of pushing together, and that is called tension. Tension. So to pull apart, and lastly, we have this thing called shear force. Shear forces are forces that are sliding against each other, so side to side. So as we move into the fault types, here's what we have. We have compression, pushing rocks together. We have tension, pulling them apart, or we have shear forces making them slide against each other. Now, the fault types themselves, we're going to do the notes, and then we're going to learn how to identify these. So first, the first fault type is called the normal fault. And here's what they look like. A normal fault is when tension pulls the overhanging rock downward. Tension is causing the rocks to move in this direction. So they're moving apart, and this overhanging rock is sliding down. The second type of fault, and we're going to come back to these here in a moment, is reverse fault. A reverse fault is the opposite. So if this one has to do with tension, this one has to do with compression. So compression squeezes the overhanging rock upward. And I would underline this in your notes as well, because the overhanging rock is how we identify the different types of faults. Okay, so how do you tell the difference between a reverse fault and a normal fault? The first thing you have to do is realize which wall is overhanging the other wall. So let's just take a look at a rock layer with a fault in it. If we take a look at these rock layers here, so we have a rock layer A, we have a rock layer B, and there's a fault. There's this big crack between them. Okay, and this crack layer is going to let them move one way or another. Okay, well, the first thing you need to know, the first thing you need to identify is which rock is overhanging, the overhanging rock. Now, in this case, the rock that is overhanging the fault is B. If you were to dig a hole right here and look up, you would have B over your head. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at a few faults, and as this looks more and more different, you need to keep that in mind. Which one is over the fault? So in the case of normal faults, tension is pulling B this direction. Okay, so if B is moving in that direction, it's going to slide down A, and you'll end up with something like this. Okay. So tension caused a normal fault in this case. In the other case, a reverse fault, the opposite happens. Compression is causing these rocks to come together, and as they squeeze together, B is forced up A. So this is what a reverse fault ends up looking like. So B gets pushed up. Okay. We're going to look at some examples. You should be able to try to identify these as we go. Now with this example, we have two rocks. Here's a similar fault. If you look at the gray layer or the green layer or the blue layer, you can see that this hanging block wall has slid down. And this is a normal fault. The mistake people often make, though, is they look and say, hey, this one is higher, so this must be the one that's above. That's not true. You have to look at the fault. When you look at the fault, imagine, okay, if I'm right here, which rock is above me? It's this rock right here, the one on the right side. So here comes another example. In this case, it's this rock on this side, which is overhanging the fault. And if you drilled a hole through here, took a look straight up, okay, here we are. Okay, the overhanging rock has slid down. That is a normal fault. Let's take a look at a reverse fault. So in this case, the hanging block wall has slid up the fault. And the way I remember reverse faults is it's going the opposite way gravity wants it to go. So normally gravity is going to follow down. That's a normal fault. Well, a reverse fault is going to be the opposite of what gravity is trying to get it to do. In this case, you have to decide which of these two rocks is overhanging. So try to think of it for a second. Which of these two rocks is over the fault? Once you figure that out, which one has it slid up or has it slid down? Has the overhanging rock gone up? Is it this one and it's gone up, or is it this one and it's gone down? So take a second. You should be able to see that this rock over here is the overhanging rock. It's over the fault. So the fault has it. You can think the overhanging rock is pressing down on the fault, and it has slid up, so this is a reverse fault. Now the last type of fault we're going to talk about is called a strike-slip fault. Okay. If you take a look at the picture here, you see there's no overhanging rock anymore, but it's a shear force, so they're sliding past each other. So plates slide against each other in strike-slip faults. Now we can take a look at some pictures of these here, right in your notes. So your notes say identify the different fault types. Here is picture number 1. Here's picture 2. Here's picture number 3. What I want you to look at for picture 3 is there's this red rock here, and there's the fault, and the red rock continues here. Also there's a crack right here that the woman is sitting in that continues down here. So take a look at those two features. This is a row of trees that you're looking at from a plane. So this row of trees used to be straight. Try to figure out what type of rock fault that is. Okay, last two are down here. So take a look at those, test yourself, make sure you double check the answers with me or somebody else, and be able to identify different types of faults.